new technology exists, even a radically new technology, that there aren't pre-existing rights. We have a bunch of laws, including human rights laws. Tech companies are not exempt from these laws. Markets themselves require rules. I slightly worry that there may be under-regulation. Are there gaps where we need to create extra rules?
I witam Państwa ponownie po krótkiej przerwie. Naszym gościem jest pan profesor John Tasioulas. Przed chwilą pan profesor miał bardzo ciekawy wykład, więc też o tym porozmawiamy. Tu przełączamy się znowu na język angielski. Hello, nice having you here, Mr. Professor. You had a quite extraordinary and interesting prelection about an hour ago, and it was about the regulations, of the artificial intelligence, and well, since for last year or something like that, I am asking myself this question: is this the time we should think about those matters, considering the regulating and regulation of the artificial intelligence? Because the revolution just has started, and we don't quite see all the outcomes yet, but we can quite precisely predict how it will, at least how it will influence the labor market. So is this the time to start serious talks and considering the artificial intelligence?
It's a good question. I think the answer is that there already is regulation that applies to AI. We mustn't assume that there is no regulation because it doesn't specifically mention AI. We have a bunch of laws, including human rights laws. Tech companies are not exempt from these laws. So the real question is, given that there is an existing regulatory scheme, existing legal principles, first question is, how do they apply to the specific case of AI and the special challenges that AI raises? And the second question becomes, are there gaps where we need to create extra rules? And so I think we need to be cautious, certainly, in assuming there are no rules and it's just the beginning of a process. There are existing rules. We have to think about modifying them if necessary, applying them, or supplementing them.
By saying there are existing rules, what do you mean specifically?
There are existing legal principles regarding negligence, regarding liability, regarding human rights, regarding intellectual property rights. An AI company that avails itself of huge amounts of data in order to train its models can't pretend that people don't have intellectual property rights in the books and articles that they're using to train their models.
Oh, this is an excellent occasion to ask this question, because lately I was working with one of the artists. He is a professional drawer, not a, I don't mean like animated things you would do in Photoshop or something like this. This particular artist really draws, sometimes putting his work to the digital sphere, but mostly this is old school artistic kind of job. And he said to me that he's terrified, he's absolutely terrified, because what is happening now is totally Wild West in the field of legal protection for artists, because what we are having now is the artificial intelligence and its models are learning on using all the assets of the internet, which includes some of the artwork of writers, movie makers, or like painters, drawers, whatever, artists. And what he said, that he was terrified because he made the he wrote to the artificial intelligence to get an art piece in style of his own.
Yes.
And that is what he received.
Indeed.
But without his input. So basically he says to me, I am robbed of my work, of my experience, of my 20 years of getting better and better with every day in what I do. And somebody just can get it for free. and I'm robbed of my work.
Yeah.
So how we deal with cases like that?
Well, this is the point. I think it's a big mistake to assume that because a new technology exists, even a radically new technology, that there aren't pre-existing rights. Authors, creators have rights, intellectual property rights in what they create. And these need to be respected, including by new technologies. Now, there may be some accommodation that needs to be made. Maybe we do want to have these models learning, but then there must be adequate recompense for people whose work is being used. So that's one of the ways in which we need to think about how an existing legal principle, which is to protect the rights of artists and creators, needs to be protected in this new environment.
Yes, it gets quite confusing because I don't know if you are familiar with Andrzej Sapkowski.
No?
Doesn't ring a bell. The Witcher.
Okay.
That's an author of The Witcher, of the original books.
Right.
And if you will input a command to the artificial intelligence, write me a piece in style of Andrzej Sapkowski's Witcher, you will receive another piece. And like, this man doesn't have a job, but somebody has an entertainment.
Exactly so. So there are pros and cons, and in other cases, it couldn't be simply an entertainment. It could be something quite much more valuable, much more socially valuable, whether it's in the health sphere or in the legal sphere, but it's relying upon published works by academics. And again, it seems to me you can't say, because this is a new technology, pre-existing rules don't apply. They do apply, but there's going to be this question of how we make them apply to take on board the specificities of the technology and also the benefits that it provides.
All the things considered, do you think the people in majority are ready for the implications of using the artificial intelligence in business, in economies?
I think, again, we need to be careful about the idea that AI is a wave that's going to hit us and that we have no control over. So I think the question about readiness is also partly a question of who gets to decide whether AI is unleashed or not. So I think we need to foster more of a democratic control over these technologies, and part of that is also to inform people more about their capabilities. The second thing, though, I will say is it's impossible to be fully ready because we can't really anticipate all the effects that this technology will have. So say, for example, someone says, here is an AI tool that a judge can use in reaching a decision. The tool doesn't make the decision. The tool assists the judge. It tells him, for example, how likely an offender is to abscond if released on bail. So we think the tool is an assistant, not a decision maker. The human is a decision maker. What if we discover, however, that all judges comply with whatever the tool recommends? They don't exercise their independent judgment. Maybe out of fear, they simply do what the automated system tells them to do. Then we've discovered something about human nature. But we don't know yet how necessarily people will interact with these systems. And so in addition to thinking about values, we also have to look at the reality of human interaction and human psychology with a new kind of entity that didn't exist before.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are always two sides of story. There are always two possible outcomes or more. And European Union, as far as I know, is the first to provide some first rules considering the artificial intelligence, which doesn't happen in the US.
Yes.
But if you look at the progress from historical point of view of the history of economy, the less regulated markets grew faster, and eventually they became the leaders. So the question is, if we overregulate the matters considering the artificial intelligence, aren't we, profound, I don't know, meant to lose this battle for the exploiting and discovering and enhancing the artificial intelligence technology or the market growth?
I think the first thing I would say is that markets themselves require regulation. You're not going to have market unless you have, for example, property structures, and that's a form of regulation. We already talked about intellectual property being important. So there isn't a kind of mutual exclusion between regulation and markets. Markets themselves require rules. But the question you raise is very important. is there overregulation? Now, what the European Union has done is that it's created the first almost comprehensive, it's not entirely because it doesn't include military applications, but a kind of comprehensive code around artificial intelligence. I think the jury is out yet whether this is overregulation. It could be, for example, that some spectacular disasters happen with AI, and we discovered that what the European Union was doing is absolutely correct. So I think it's unclear at the moment whether it's overregulation. Personally, in the work that I've done writing about the European Union, I slightly worry that there may be under-regulation. And the reason is as follows. The AI Act depends upon identifying high-risk AI systems. And the way the systems are identified is by their domain of application. So, for example, if it's a system in emergency medical services, that's high risk. I don't think you can identify a priori high-risk areas. That leaves the problem that there might be human rights gaps. And equally, there are problems with what are known as foundational models that are not subject to the most strict form of regulation. Again, it's unclear. So going to your point about how this will affect economic growth, I think it's still an open question to me, because it could be that the less regulatory approach, the more libertarian American approach, might lead to a disaster. And then we'll see the wisdom of what the Europeans have been doing.
It's a matter of approach, correctly.
I think that's right.
And the outcome may be totally different. It may be something we can't even imagine right now.
I think in a way we're conducting some experiments. The experiment in China is very statist and authoritarian. The experiment in America is much more libertarian. The experiment in the European Union is much more sort of the Napoleonic, here is a code, and the stress on human rights. And I think we're going to learn over time the pros and cons of the different approaches.
So finally, at the end, it's better to be safe than sorry.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And then also, don't forget, it could be that what the European Union produces is found to be very attractive by consumers in other countries, who then start making demands for similar safeguards being in place in their countries as well.
Thank you very much. It was a fascinating talk, and dziękuję Państwu serdecznie i zapraszamy na naszą następną rozmowę po krótkiej przerwie. Dziękuję.